George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Sure, what did I just see there? Only Al-Qaeda and ISIS finally getting their own state. Sure, what did I see there? Russian warships in Syria take to the Mediterranean, perhaps never to return, unless there's been a deal done, in which case they will return, but how long will the deal last? Sure, what did I just see there? The siege of Lebanon has begun as Israel expands its territory deep into Syria. Sure, what did I just see there? Only the end of the Silk Road in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. The Mediterranean is now a no-go. Sure, what did I just see there? Oh, it turns out Al-Qaeda and ISIS are like that leopard, you know, the one that changed its spots. You better stay tuned. This is going to be a humdinger of a show. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
As I said in Parliament in 2001 to the then government of Tony Blair, don't talk to me about Al-Qaeda. I was opposing Al-Qaeda when the British state were stuffing guns and money down the throat of Osama bin Laden. Don't talk to me about Bashar al-Assad or his father. His father and him were presidents of Syria for 50 years. I was, as you well know, with Iraq in the great divide, let's call it a chasm, of the Arab Ba'ath Party, an Arab nationalist dictatorship in both countries, and definitely in the case of Syria, an Arab nationalist dictatorship for 50 years. I had no relations with Syria. I have not visited there for many years, and nothing I'm going to say now indicates any love for the Syrian government, as was prior to waking up this morning. Everything I'm going to say in the next few minutes is about the love that I have for the Syrian people, the admiration, the reverence, actually, for the fidelity to the Arab national cause that the Syrian people and even the Syrian state has always exemplified. The Syrian national movement founded Arab nationalism in Damascus, the longest serving capital city in the entire world. The Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party didn't have much to do with socialism, long forgotten and not widely practiced even before it was forgotten. But it was a citadel of the essential dignity of the Arab masses, that their people were a people, that their nation were a nation, wahad, one people, from the Atlantic to the Gulf. They never bent the knee to the Israeli state next door. They never surrendered their sovereignty over the Golan Heights, an area which has now been vastly expanded by an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. You haven't heard about the Israeli invasion of Syria yet, although you're never done hearing about other countries invading their neighbors. But the invasion of Syria this afternoon by Benjamin Netanyahu, while he stood on the Golan Heights, illegally annexed, but belonging to Syria ever since it was seized in 1967, was exultant about the role, which cannot be denied, that Israel has played in the downfall of the Syrian government and the flight of its president and his family to political asylum in Russia, in Moscow, which is where they are currently ensconced. It would have behoven President Assad to make a farewell address, even if pre-recorded, to his people. It would have behoven Assad to thank all those who sacrificed, for example, to defend the tomb of Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. Thousands gave their blood to defend that shrine, and now it is on fire. Now it has been set alight by the HTS. Everything I'm going to say to you tonight stems from my hatred of fundamentalist fanaticism, of the death cult that is ISIS and al-Qaeda. My hatred of the takfiriism, the sectarianism, the murderous hatred of anything that is different from your narrow interpretation of your religion. Even people who share your religion, even people who share the same sect of your religion. Anyone who is different in any way has to be murdered and decapitated and mutilated and maimed and killed in the most horrendous ways. I don't have to look in the crystal ball for that. I can look at what happened when this ISIS al-Qaeda phenomenon took control of significant parts of Syria over the last 12 or so years. I can tell you that the people they butchered, the heads that they cut off, the throats that they slit, the hearts that they ate, the churches that they burned, the relics that they destroyed, the nuns that they kidnapped, the priests that they murdered, the bishops that they murdered, are all still haunting them. And they haunt my perception of what they might do now that they are back in control, not just of some parts of Syria, but in control of the state itself. The leader, de facto, of the new Syria is a man called al-Jolani. Well, that's not really his name. Like Tommy Robinson, he adopted that name. His real identity need not concern you, but his CV definitely should. He was the deputy leader to al-Zarqawi, the al-Qaeda leader in Iraq. Then he was sent to Syria as the deputy leader to the founder of ISIS. The founder of ISIS was the number one, and al-Jolani was the number two of ISIS in Syria. And now he's the de facto leader of Syria. Al-Baghdadi thought highly of his work, and he can certainly look up from hell, where I hope he currently burns, and see that he has in the end triumphed. And he has triumphed precisely because the Western Empire facilitated his entry into Damascus and helped him to hang the black flags on the Umayyad Mosque, the black flags on the presidential palace in Damascus once it stops burning, because that too is on fire. The Western Empire and its Israeli satrapy played, as Netanyahu boasted today, the most important and decisive role in the destruction of what was the Syrian Arab Republic. Heaven knows what it will be by the end of all this. It'll be many things, but it won't be Syrian, it won't be Arab, and it won't be a republic. Presumably some kind of hodgepodge of balkanized ethno-states, like the Israeli state next door, will be the result. But only time will tell about that. The fact that we have put the former deputy head of ISIS in power in Damascus, the former deputy head of alqaeda in Iraq, has been put in power in Damascus, is what I'm talking about this evening, and will be with two of our most outstanding guests, Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran and Scott Ritter, the former UN arms inspector and former intelligence officer in the United States Marine Corps. I'm not speaking for them. They won't necessarily have views that agree entirely with mine. In fact, I'm certain that they won't. But these are my honestly held views, and they are the views of someone who, between 1980 and 2002, never set foot in Syria and would not have been wanted there if I had. The truth is that the rejoicing of the empire and of Netanyahu can be borne much more easily than I can bear the rejoicing of the liberals. The liberal progressives, the Yanis Varoufakis of the world, the Keir Starmers and Angela Rayners, the Emmanuel Macrons, and the people with Palestine flags in their bios, people who have told us for the last 14 months how Palestine was in their heart, rejoicing about a great and historic Israeli victory. You have to know this. What happened today in Syria is a death blow to Palestinian resistance. What happened today in Syria is a death blow to the Lebanese resistance. What happened today in Syria is a death blow to the axis of resistance, which now has no corridor through which to funnel the necessary materiel. Netanyahu told you, don't believe me. There is now no road from Iran to the Lebanese resistance, and from the Lebanese resistance to the Gaza Strip, to the West Bank. Know that as you dance on the political grave of al-Assad and his government. Know that you are celebrating a strategic victory of unimaginable dimension and a victory that cannot be over-exaggerated. This is a stunning reversal of political fortunes. Joe Biden has played a binder in the last days of his presidency. No one knew he had it in him. He's cancelled the elections in Romania that were about to be won by a landslide of the guy who wanted to stop the war in Ukraine and wanted peaceful relations with Russia. He's got them fighting on the streets of Georgia. He's got them dying in their hundreds every day in Gaza. He's got half of the Gaza Strip completely eliminated. He's forced a ceasefire on the Lebanese resistance, the only organized Arab assistance to the Palestinian cause anywhere on the planet. Anywhere. None of them. No Gulf state, no Maghrebi state, no Levantine state, only the Lebanese resistance and the great people of Yemen, the true heroes of this last 14 months. Nothing will now exist. Hezbollah is still a strong organization, but it now will have no money, and it will now have no new weapons, and soon it will have no bullets at all. Nothing stands in the way. Syria lies on the floor, prone, with its neighbors, able to take whatever it is that they want. That's the stakes that were lost today with the collapse of the Syrian state. Israel has already taken and is ready to take more. From tonight, Israel is in a state of war with Syria. The chief of the Israeli army has declared it. The Israeli tanks are on the move. They smashed through the gate of their annexed part of the Golan Heights into Konetra and the Syrian side of the Golan district. They're on the move. They're going to take whatever they want. When asked about it, Jolani, who comes from the Golan Heights, said, "We do not have the capacity to do anything about this." Syria's air defenses, its aeroplanes, its heavy artillery are all being destroyed right now in an Israeli blitzkrieg bombing, laying waste. Syria is now defenseless. Anyone can take anything they want from Syria. They've taken the corridor from Iran. They will undoubtedly take the Russian military base in Tartus. As it happens, there are no Russian ships there at the moment. They're out in the Mediterranean, which may or may not be a coincidence. But Russia will not have any Mediterranean base to come back to. Even if a deal was done, even if they're going to be allowed to keep it, they will not be allowed to keep it for long. Russia's air base has closed. The Russian embassy now has no flag flying on it. Matter of time, in my opinion, before it is sacked and destroyed. China's Silk Route is now dead. No country on the Mediterranean will dare now participate in it. The Mediterranean exit of the Silk Route is now closed. But here I turn to what may be, for some, the most painful blow of all. The Syrian people are the biggest losers. They will now have to live under the black flags of ISIS and al-Qaeda and hope that the New York Times and CNN are right and that the man who co-founded ISIS in Syria is a leopard which changed its spots. Diversity is now their motto, don't you know? Syrian people, especially Syrian women, especially Syrian Christians, Syrian Shiites, Syrian Alawites, Druze, Kurds, they're all the biggest losers. But the next biggest loser is Iran. The truth is, Iran did not just lose its corridor to supply the Lebanese resistance and thus the Palestinian resistance with the wherewithal to resist, to be a resistance, to exist as a resistance. Iran suddenly became very isolated indeed. From being the head, the heart of a whole axis of resistance, Iran would be well advised to put whatever money it's now going to save, not having to help prop up the Syrian government, to making sure that they prop up their own. Iran's prestige, status, image, strength, soft power has all been gravely damaged over the last 24 hours. As has Russia's. Russia and Iran and China, which had invested less and therefore will suffer less. But Iran, Russia, and China have all suffered mightily in the overthrow of the Syrian Arab Republic. And people are asking, why did Syria not do more? Not in the last 10 days, but it's now clear that the Syrian state had become hollowed out by sanctions. It couldn't afford to pay the soldiers that it demobilized since 2017. Why did its allies not ensure that it was able to pay them? Why did Russia and Iran not know that so emaciated had become Syrian state power that a tiny finger could have pushed it over? And that is what happened. Golani leads at maximum 25,000 fighters. The Syrian army was 200,000 strong. Then there were the various militias that staved off this disaster many times over the last 10 years. Why was it allowed to become so hollowed out that its defeat, when it came, was not even with a whimper, it was with a squeak? Why did Iran not realize the price itself would pay if the Syrian state were to collapse? Why did Russia not realize the price it would pay in prestige, in logistics, in soft power, in every way, including its naval and air bases in the country? And why didn't they take steps to stop from happening what happened today? Well, we're in a good place. We can ask at least some of those questions right now to our first guest this evening, our beloved guest this evening, Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi of the University of Tehran. Stay tuned for it. I'll be right back. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, this question in our poll today ranks with is the Pope a Catholic and do bears defecate in the woods? We're asking in our poll, are the Islamist rebels in Syria backed by the CIA? Yes or no? And if you vote no, as some people have actually, in fact, on X, 22% say no, they're not. You're either a liar or you're an inmate of Ward 5 in Broadmoor, the hospital for the criminally insane. But hey, you can vote how you like, yes or no. Are the Islamist rebels in Syria backed by the CIA? Yes or no? We should have a third box. Are you incarcerated in Broadmoor? You can vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my X, my Twitter feed. You can vote on the YouTube community poll, and you can vote on the YouTube stream. If you want to call the show tonight, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the international number for the rest of the world is 0044 203 966 2625. Let's take a quick call before going to Professor Marandi in Tehran. It's Fiaz in London. Go ahead, Fiaz.
Hi, George. Great to speak to you again. Man,
And you?
what can I say? What an insane. I feel better calling this a circus show, but that would be putting it too lightly. I mean, all these so-called rebels who are actually an amalgamation of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, now becoming HTS, to overtaking Syria with the help of the US, Turkey, even us from the British government and Israel. It's just a complete madness. And I wanted to fall back onto what you were saying earlier about how the people of Syria, not just Sunni Muslims, myself being one, but the Shias, the Kurds, the Syrian Christians, and the Druze, they're all losers in this. Now, I say to people, regardless of what you may think of Bashar al-Assad's regime, the fact of the matter is, his government protected these minorities from these terrorists, and it's going to happen. But now that he's been overthrown, it's going to happen again. And I've seen all these so-called Muslim groups that were all for standing for Gaza and the Palestinian people cheering this on. I mean, I don't know about you, George, but but I'm asking, how can you be for the liberation of Palestinian people under Israeli oppression, but be happy with ousting Bashar al-Assad to allow Israel, which essentially allows Israel to complete its expansionist goals?
Sure. Well, it is the question. I don't know why some of these people, I see them on social media just like you do. I don't know why they think like they do. Is it the case that their support for Palestine was insincere in the first place? I mean, this HTS has given interviews in the Israeli media in the last few days in which they express their wish to have good neighborly relations with Netanyahu's Israel. I mean, they're not hiding it. They're not pretending that they're taking Syria today and they're going to liberate Palestine tomorrow. They're not pretending. On the contrary, they are openly stating that they will have a surrender, a peace with Israel. They'll be just like Jordan, just like Egypt. They will not as much as break an Israeli window. And they haven't as much as broken an Israeli window in the last 14 months of genocide. Remember that? Anyone remember the genocide in Gaza? Seems not. These people did not as much as break an Israeli window. And they are openly stating that they will not. So, were you insincere when you said you were for Palestine? Listen, the truth is, Israel can now do what it pleases. It can drive the Palestinians out of the West Bank. It can resettle them in Syria. It can ethnically cleanse all of Gaza instead of just the northern part of Gaza. It can drive them into Egypt. It can drive them into the sea. Who's going to stop them? Not any Western government. And soon there'll be nobody at all with the ability to stop them, even if they had the will to stop them, which so far there has been jolly little evidence of. So, as to these people, well, are they hypocrites or are they just stupid? I'm sure both are present in the horde of rejoicers to whom you refer. It's possible that this iteration, this name, HTS, will be different to al-Qaeda and ISIS. Only time will tell, but the early signs are not good. The Syrian state bank has just been looted. The shrine of the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad is literally ablaze. Her relics, her bones are on fire. That doesn't sound much like diversity to me. I believe, and I pray that I'm wrong, because of the love I have for the Syrian people that I expressed earlier. But I believe that Syria will be Libya on steroids. Syria will be Afghanistan on steroids. If you think that the former deputy of al-Qaeda and ISIS, both he held, is going to fairly govern a state of Sunnis, Shiites, Alawite, Druze, Kurds, Christians, with no sectarian hatred in his heart, well, you've got a much better view of humanity than I do. I finally say this, Fiaz, and you said you were a Muslim. Let me tell you about the holiest place I have ever been in my life, and I include the Vatican, is the village, small town of Maaloula, which is carved into the rocks in Syria, where they speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. It is the holiest place, the most sacred atmosphere I have ever experienced. Al-Qaeda are now in control of it. They are in control of the convents. They are in control of the churches. They are in control of the monasteries. If you can find it, any of you, all of you, in your heart, to pray for the people of Maaloula this evening, I hope that you will. Thank you, Fiaz, in London. I hope that we are ready now to speak to Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, Chair of American Studies at the University of Tehran. Professor, a grim situation. Give us, please, first your thoughts, and then allow me, please, to ask you some searching questions.
Thank you, George. First of all, with regards to your poll, I think Jake Sullivan, if he had the right to vote, or if he had the courage to vote, or if he would admit the truth once again, as he did in his email to Hillary Clinton on February the 12th, 2012, that al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, he would vote that it is a CIA-backed organization. ISIS and al-Qaeda were both supported by the CIA. We know from that email, we know from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 that Turkey and despots in the Persian Gulf and U.S. allies in the region were wanted to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq to isolate Syria. Well, what was that entity? It was ISIS. So they created al-Qaeda. They supported ISIS. And then Kerry said, we allowed, in a leaked audio, he said, we and Qatar and Turkey and Saudi Arabia funded ISIS. And he admitted that they allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. And I think it was Obama, when ISIS invaded Iraq, in, I think, an interview with Atlantic, he said we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki. So, and Hillary Clinton once admitted that we created al-Qaeda. It's clear as day who is behind these groups. It's clear as day that Erdogan is the person first and foremost responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians. I know you know of Serena Shim. She was the Press TV reporter, Lebanese American, who was reporting from the Turkish border, I think in 2012, when Ain al-Arab or Kobani was under assault from ISIS. She reported from the border that World Food Organization trucks were being used to take in weapons and troops into Syria from Turkey. And then Turkish intelligence called her a spy, and she went on Press TV live, said that I'm scared. I've been accused of being of espionage, and I'm afraid. That very same day she was killed. Turkish intelligence murdered her in a car when a truck hit her car. So Netanyahu has succeeded in raising the black flags of ISIS and al-Qaeda in Damascus. And those who support Erdogan and his actions, they cannot hide behind these facts. Assad, those who say Assad killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, they are the ones who are supporting the people who actually carried out these atrocities.
Well, these are facts that you have adduced, but there are other facts. The reality is now that the Palestinians have suffered a strategic defeat of almost incalculable magnitude. They are now isolated. The only people giving them weapons to resist were Iran, and the only people who were fighting as an organized army on their behalf were the Lebanese resistance. Now, as a result of what's happened, Iran cannot reach these people. They cannot be resupplied. They are in mortal danger of fatal, final defeat. Do you accept that, first of all, and then we'll go on to what could have been done to avoid this?
It is a very dangerous situation because we know that Erdogan has never been serious about the Palestinian cause. In fact, Erdogan has always tried to corrupt the Palestinian cause. He gives scholarships to Palestinians. He'd host leaders of the Palestinian movements in Turkey and give their family a very good life, and therefore he gained influence that way. But he never sent a single bullet to Gaza. He never sent a single bullet to the West Bank. He once said, before Israel invaded Lebanon, that if they attack Lebanon, we'll send troops there. He didn't send a bullet to Lebanon. And I should add, now that Syria's fallen, that Iran and Syria were supporting the West Bank. The Syrians were supporting the West Bank until now. So now the West Bank is going to have a much more difficult time protecting itself as these genocidal monsters seek to ethnically cleanse that territory. Hezbollah is in a much more difficult position. In fact, today, as I'm sure you know, Netanyahu went to the Golan. Not only did the Israeli regime move further into Syria today, but they also have been bombing key assets of Syria all day, destroying their key infrastructure. But what he said was really interesting. He said that because we weakened Hezbollah, we helped bring about the fall of Syria. So, and when he accepted the ceasefire, he said we have to deal with the so-called Iran threat. What was that threat? It's Syria. And immediately after the ceasefire, Erdogan, the traitor, invaded Syria. When Iran was distracted, when Hezbollah was focused on the south, because the ceasefire was not a real ceasefire. Every day the Israelis are killing the Lebanese. Yesterday, I think 4 were murdered. Today, 3 were murdered at least until this afternoon. The border between Palestine and Lebanon is very dangerous, the situation right now. So the treachery of Erdogan, I think, will be remembered in history. So yes, I agree. The situation for the Palestinian people is very dangerous right now. It's precarious. And I can't say it's been a catastrophic defeat, but without a doubt, the victory, the defeat of Israel is now, I think, an open question. Israel lost in Gaza, regardless of the genocide. It delegitimized itself in the eyes of the world, and it failed to capture it. It lost in Lebanon. It failed to capture Lebanon, and it exposed itself again as genocidal and weak in the face of Hezbollah. But now, after what Erdogan has done, the equation has changed. And this Israeli defeat is, I can't call it a defeat anymore. And the delegitimization of the Israeli regime, which I think is the biggest achievement of the last 14 months, the delegitimization in the eyes of the world, is now being forgotten. Because no one is, as you said a few minutes earlier, no one is talking about the ongoing Holocaust. As you and I are speaking, there's a Holocaust going on. Nothing has changed. They're slaughtering Palestinians day and night in Gaza. And I ask your viewers to constantly be active in the coming hours and days and keep sending out the message that there's a Holocaust going on. The Israeli regime has to be there. Its actions have to be remembered by people in the coming days and weeks, and the delegitimization of the regime has to be maintained. But yes, I agree. This victory, because the Israelis had to achieve victory, otherwise it's a defeat. And until now, it was a defeat for Israel. But the last 10 days, thanks to the Erdogan-Netanyahu alliance, I can no longer say that.
Well, let me say what you're not able to say, or don't feel able to say. It's an Israeli victory. Israel has snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat. Because all this talk of delegitimization and their name is blackened throughout the world and so on, that doesn't add up to a row of beans. Unless the people fighting the occupation are able to go on fighting it, it's a victory for the occupier. So that brings me to, well, let me in parenthesis ask you this. I asked it publicly today for the first time in 14 months. October the 7th now looks like a very bad idea. And it makes you wonder, whose idea was it anyway? Because you can say that Israel paid a big price in soft power, paid a big price in its reputation and so on, but all the key players still support it, arm it, give weapons to it. And those that stand against them have now suffered a strategic defeat. Do you have a view on that?
I'm sure that the great martyr Yahya Sinwar never expected Erdogan to carry out this act of treachery at this point. In fact, as you know, Yahya Sinwar said very openly that he was against what was happening in Syria, and that he saw Syria as a part of this axis of resistance. Who has more right to talk about Palestine, Yahya Sinwar or Erdogan, who's selling oil, cheap Baku, who's sending cheap Baku oil to Israel, who's been aiding the genocide for 14 months, who maintains diplomatic relations, who never once told Aliyev to stop selling oil, who continues to do indirect trade with the Israeli regime, and who now has brought the black flags to Damascus. I don't think Yahya Sinwar ever thought for a moment that this would happen under these circumstances. He couldn't even wait a few weeks to carry out his attack. So the Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, what could they do? They were in a concentration camp. The West Bank was being ethnically cleansed. East Jerusalem was being ethnically cleansed. I understand why they did it. And I don't think any of us can see the future. Hezbollah made the greatest sacrifices for the people of Gaza because they did so willingly since October the 8th. But what else could Hezbollah do but stand with the people of Palestine and the people of Gaza? And they paid a huge price for their willing assistance to the people of Gaza. But they didn't foresee the betrayal of Erdogan, the treason that Erdogan carried out. The people of Turkey are supportive of the Palestinians. But Erdogan knows very well who his henchmen are. He knows exactly who ISIS is. He is ISIS. He is Al-Qaeda because he helped them grow. He allowed them to destroy Syria and Iraq. He promoted them. And now if he is such a moral man, and he and his foreign minister, another criminal, if they are so moral, why did they want to mend relations with President Assad? If President Assad is such a monster, why were they willing to turn around and normalize with Syria? And then again, turn around later and overthrow Syria. What morality is that? He has no principles whatsoever. So how could Yahya Sinwar, who led that operation, be blamed for the criminal behavior of the Erdogan regime and his henchmen? I cannot blame Hamas or Islamic Jihad for what they did.
Yeah. Finally, Professor, it's a difficult question to ask. You might find it difficult to answer. You have concentrated on damning Erdogan, and very few watching will disagree with you. But why did Iran not see this coming? Iran is or was everywhere in Syria. They had the most intensive understanding of the situation in Syria. Why did they not see this coming? Why did they not take steps to preclude it?
I don't want to blame President Assad now that this is over. It's easy to blame people afterwards. It was a very critical situation. But a number of things happened. First of all, the Syrian government decreased Iran's presence in Syria after the peace in Idlib. And Iran, by the way, was opposed to this. The Russians wanted this peace. Iran felt that Idlib would become a crisis later on. But the Syrian government wanted rapprochement with Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and they distanced themselves from Iran. And the Iranian footprint in Israel, in Syria, as they say, was decreased. So Iran had far few people in Syria over the past 3-4 years than before. The second issue is, and you alluded to that, is that the problem lied with the fact that the United States emptied Syria. They were stealing the oil and the agricultural products from the northeast of the country, and they used the genocidal sanctions, the Caesar sanctions to starve the people. A general in the Syrian army was earning $40 a month, and these al-Qaeda terrorists were earning up to $2,000 a month. So when the economy was emptied, the army was weak, and then social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they and the Arabic media, these despots in the region, and the Western media, all of them carried out a very effective psychological warfare campaign against the Syrians when this started. So the Syrian army wasn't able to defend itself. And of course Hezbollah, because as Netanyahu himself said, was back in Lebanon. They were hurt, and they were prepared to fight for the south. So they weren't in Syria. The Iranians didn't have much of a presence. And then when this attack started, Iran had to mobilize, and they did start bringing people in. A significant number of people were in Damascus. But, and this I don't want to blame President Assad, but he changed his position twice over the last 2-3 days. The Iranians were willing to come in, just like in 2013. Remember, Iran did not enter, nor did Hezbollah, until 2013, after tens of thousands of foreign fighters were brought into Syria by Erdogan and Western intelligence agencies, and with funding from these despots in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians were prepared. They told him so, that they were prepared to fight against al-Qaeda. He changed his position, and the timing, there was very little time. Unless President Assad was very firm that, yes, come in and the army will cooperate with you, Iran could not go into Syria and fight on its own without the support of the president and the government. It would fail. It would be a catastrophe. So the Iranians came in, and I don't want to go into great detail. I don't know everything now, but I know some of what happened. But President Assad, for whatever reason, people were giving him different information. Perhaps people were calling him from abroad. At one point he said, I'll leave. At one point he said, I'll stand. And then he said, I'll leave. But the Iranians cannot fight in another country without the full support of the president of that country. But anyway, I don't blame him, because the situation was critical. I don't know the circumstances, but the treason came from the north. This was about more than just Syria. And have no doubt that this will cause instability across Asia. There are up to 5,000 Chinese fighters in Syria, thousands from Central Asia, especially Uzbekistan. And these people will destabilize much of Asia if they can. They're right now euphoric. They're drunk in their victory, and they will be a danger in future. Erdogan has created a monster that can destabilize much of Asia, and I think the Americans want that. But of course, this is not going to benefit the West. This instability is not going to benefit the region either. No one is going to go unscathed. Only two people benefit. One is Erdogan and one is Netanyahu. And these two men are very similar. Erdogan does it for himself, not for Turkey. And Netanyahu does it for himself and not his Zionist colleagues and the other Zionist colonizers. But in any case, I think that al-Qaeda will ultimately fail. It's going to be a very big burden on the people of Turkey. It's going to destabilize the region. And I think that Erdogan, things are very different today, George, from what it was in 2011, 12, 13. I think you know this much better than I. People are much more awake today to the reality of what's going on in our region than back then. Back then, there were a few lone voices telling people what was going on, and most did not believe it. Now everyone knows what Jake Sullivan said. Now everyone knows what Kerry said. Now everyone knows what the Defense Intelligence Agency said, what General Michael Flynn said on Al Jazeera. Everyone knows that the CIA, Israel, and Erdogan are in bed together, and that and that Erdogan sacrificed the people of Palestine. And we will see in the weeks and months ahead, as I think you alluded to at the beginning of the show, that Erdogan and al-Qaeda will do nothing to harm the Israeli regime.
I infer then your answer to my next question, but let me ask it anyway. It's my final one, and I'm grateful for your time. There are people, I don't know enough about it to have a view myself, but there are people who do know a lot about it, who think that the change of president in Iran has changed, at least, if not the political line, then at least the enthusiasm for the political line, the resolve to enforce the political line. Is there anything in that, in your view?
I understand that position. I think that there are some people in the current administration that are naive about the United States, who think that if we show a willingness to compromise, that the Americans will compromise. I don't believe that that is the case. I believe that the Americans will, as always, they'll misinterpret this as a sign of weakness, and they'll become more aggressive. That is what history has told us. That is what happened after the nuclear deal. That is what happened after when we were named the axis of evil. There are hosts of instances where the Iranians showed goodwill and they were slapped, and their hands were slapped by the Americans. But I don't believe that the policy of Iran has changed towards the Palestinian people or towards Syria. The Iranians were prepared to move in. The Iranians did send a large number of advisors. They were in Damascus, and troops under Iranian supervision were in Damascus and in the areas around that. They had come in from abroad. But, as I said, they needed the full consent and support of the president and thus the cooperation of the Syrian Arab Army in order to begin fighting. So Iran was prepared to make sacrifices. But if the Syrian president was not committed, and if the Syrian army was not committed, then it would have been a failure, and you would have had a lot of dead Iranians and forces from Iraq and Lebanon and Afghanistan, and people would say, why did that happen? So I don't believe that Iran's general policy has changed. I don't believe the Iranian president has these views, but I do believe that there are people in the administration who are naive about the United States, and perhaps some of their views have emboldened the Americans and their allies, unfortunately. But policy has not changed in Tehran.
Professor, thank you as always for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned, everyone. We've got the one and only Scott Ritter coming up later, but not on YouTube. Because YouTube tried to dictate to us who we could have as our guests and named Scott Ritter as an unacceptable guest, we have no choice but towards the end of the show to break away from YouTube and ask you to retune elsewhere on any of the other platforms on which we are broadcasting, which is essentially all of them. But in the second hour, we'll take your calls. And of course, if you want to see the interview, we'll end the live stream on YouTube when Scott comes on. You'll need to switch to X, Facebook, Rumble, Instagram, and all the other myriad of platforms on which we stand. Let's take a call after the break from Sabah in Texas on Syria. We truly are the global university of the airwaves. Stay tuned. On the line is a Rose in Texas. I was at the beginning of a song on Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, almost 40,000 people have voted. Are the Islamist rebels in Syria backed by the CIA, yes or no? On all platforms except Elon Musk's X, the overwhelming number say yes, 91, 91, 94. Unaccountably, you may say, on X, 23% say no. As I said earlier, you're either liars or you're residents of Ward 5 at Broadmoor, the hospital for the criminally insane, if you vote no to that question. Sabah is in Texas on Syria. He's up next. Sabah, what would you like to say?
Hey, George, how you doing? I'm someone who actually lived on both sides of the coin. I'm not very different from your age, actually, maybe 10 years different, you know. But you don't feel someone else's pain unless you live through it. I want you just to hold on for 5 seconds before you make a judgment. Don't rush to a judgment about me unless you hear what I'm trying to say here. The problem with the Syrian regime and Saddam Hussein's regime, it's not the regime itself. It's the people they surround themselves with. Believe me, when I was a child, you know, our father used to tell us, hey, go do your homework. But we wanted to watch TV. That's back in 1979. So we used to lie to him to tell him, hey, you know, Father, Saddam Hussein is on TV. And then he would rush. Really? He wants to turn on the TV because we liked him so much. But all it took 1 year for him to go 180 degrees different, you know what I mean, on hating him and liking him. So what's the problem is the Ba'ath Party. That's the problem. The Ba'ath Party, they surround themselves with the worst kind of people. And what I'm talking about is the very outsiders, those who deal with people directly. They are indeed very, very oppressive. And once again, I flew the regime of Saddam Hussein in 1991 because I couldn't take it anymore. So don't blame the Syrian people. It's not about
Sabah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sabah, you imagine a difference between you and me on that, but there is no difference. I'm not a supporter of the Ba'ath Party. Of the two wings of it, I prefer the Iraqi to the Syrian, as is well known. But I did not support the people of Iraq because I was a Ba'athist. I support the idea of one Arab nation. But if anything, if you wanted to apply a label to me, it would be a Nasserist. It would not be a Ba'athist, neither one wing or the other wing. And you don't have to tell me about the kind of people in these two regimes. I'm well aware of them. And as I said in a tweet earlier today, in fact, as soon as I learned the news that the country had collapsed, within a minute or two, I was at the keyboard and I said that the long siege on Syria had weakened and hollowed out the country. It had enriched thousands, but impoverished millions. There is no doubt at all that the Syrian and Iraqi regimes were surrounded, is your word, I would say imbued with corrupt practice, personal enrichment, corruption of the worst kind. I remember in a conversation in Iraq with Saddam Hussein and other leaders, I started to tell them, this is how it went. I say, when I was writing my book on Fidel Castro, I lived in the same apartment block as the son of Che Guevara. Everyone sat up straight. Che Guevara has a son? Yes, say I. He looks just like him. He's got a son that looks just like him. Why isn't he everywhere in the world? Why isn't he important? Why isn't he up there in the media and all? I reply, he works in the foreign ministry for $30 a month, the same as the other public officials in Cuba. In Cuba, you're not somebody because your father was somebody. And that dawned on me, the thin ice onto which I had just walked. I compounded it by saying that the son of Fidel Castro is a foreman in the nuclear plant, goes to work in a boiler suit every day. And his name is Fidel. Fidel Castro Jr. goes to work in a boiler suit. And I could see uncomfortable shifting around the table because these regimes were oppressive, were brutal against any opponent of theirs, but generally left other people alone. Crucially, protected religious and ethnic minorities. That's a difference between their dictatorships and the other dictatorships. What you are saying is that these two countries were dictatorships. Of course they were. But every Arab state is a dictatorship. From Morocco to Bahrain, they are all dictatorships. But there's dictatorships and dictatorships, isn't there? You must know that. There's dictatorships that have only the aim of robbing their own people and murdering their own people. And there are dictatorships that have some saving graces. In the case of the Syrian one, a refusal to surrender to Israel, a refusal to stop supporting the resistance to Israel, a refusal to eject the leadership of Hamas, for example, Hamas lived in Damascus for years, ate from the plate of Bashar al-Assad. The Saudis wouldn't have fed them. The Saudis wouldn't have trained them. The Emiratis wouldn't have armed them. You see my point. There's dictatorships and there's dictatorships. And finally, Syria and Iraq may have been dictatorships, but were they more dictatorial than the Arab regimes with Israeli embassies in their capital, with the Mossad running their airport security? Are they more dictatorial than those? Ask yourself, Sabah, but you know the answer. Now you can scan the QR code on your screen now, and you can leave a comment if you're watching on the YouTube stream, and we'll read them out if we can. Eric Pachiti says, dividing the Arabs has worked so effectively. Bashar al-Assad burst out laughing when Gaddafi warned Arab leaders in 2008 in Damascus that their turn was next. He's not laughing now. And Ismi says, I'm glad Iran did not stand against these rebels. I wasn't surprised. Assad's regime could not sustain itself, and Iran did not want to turn this into a Shia-Sunni war. And DW says, praying for the people of Syria right now, though Jesus bless them. So many parts of the world are now in chaos, and all for the advantage of an ungodly few. Radmila Miljanik says, this is a huge lesson to everyone. No frozen conflicts. Never trust NATO members. And Morn's Lad says, leave the likes of the Jordanians, Saudis, Kuwaitis, UAE regimes alone, because they may be dictators, but they are our dictators. Let's go back to the States, to Missouri, where Saba wants to talk about Syria. Saba, welcome.
Yes, George, welcome. I just want to thank you for your show that you talk about a lot of important subjects, and you talked over the years about what's going on in the Middle East and what's happening and freedom of speech. But we also have an issue why a lot of Americans can't speak about things in the United States, especially hundreds of thousands of professors, doctors, engineers, including myself. What happens is covertly, like openly in the Middle East, sometimes there's dictators, they do stuff openly. But in the United States, they do stuff covertly with the intelligence apparatus, with dual citizens, Israeli Americans, Mossad, FBI, CIA, FBI. And what they do to hundreds of thousands of Americans, they would fire energy weapons on them, causing them to have cancer, heart attacks, multiple numbers of diseases. The governor of Minnesota, his name is Jesse Ventura, he talked about this issue. He talked about it on his show called Conspiracy Theory, where one of the companies that develops protection devices for these types of weapon systems said he couldn't believe the numbers of Americans that were hit with them, and especially educated people. So you have two things happening in parallel. Politicians that are bribed and blackmailed by a foreign intelligence agency, like through the Israeli Mossad, which is illegal against the United States. But in parallel, you have hundreds of thousands of educated people that are being targeted with this weapon system covertly. And there's a lot of plausible deniability companies that are established so they can attack them. The DEA doesn't, it recognizes it, says national security. The FBI covers it up. The CIA covers it up. And we have a massacre happening in the United States. If you can't have Americans speak their mind and write books.
I'm gonna stop you there. I'm gonna stop you there because I think what you're saying is insane. And I think it's much more likely that the FBI would murder you in your bed, or if you were the president, in the back of your car. I'm blissfully unaware of hundreds of thousands of people being targeted by high energy weapons that destroys their minds and their health. If I turn out to have been poorly informed, do come back and tell me. But for the moment, I'm going to press on to, shall we say, more concrete issues. Raul in Texas wants to talk about Syrian Christians. Go ahead, Raul.
Hey, how are you doing? This is Pastor Raul Dominguez. I'm a member of the clergy of the Global Methodist Church, and it is very difficult, because I've been always involved in missions all around the world, and we've been supporting different missionaries, especially those who were working in Kurdistan and in different parts of Syria. And now my fear is that with this new deployment of terrorists, I'm afraid of friends of mine and people who are there preaching the gospel. Now they're going to be persecuted, and I'm afraid of their lives. And now that Syria has no head, and the ones who are taking over are completely people who will follow the Mossad and the Western policies. I'm very afraid of their lives, and we want them to be secure and protected. And what I was hearing right now, before I started to talk, it's completely right. I've been taking care of many people who, through vaccines, radiations, they've been very sick, and we've seen a lot of people getting shot, not shot, but killed by mysterious causes. We don't know what is happening, or at least we pretend. And whenever somebody speaks against the policies, now we have to take care of ourselves because we don't know what's going to happen to us in the future. So, but this is my thinking.
Well, leaving the second part of what you said aside, it may be that I am blissfully unaware of these high-energy weapons that are targeting hundreds of thousands of intelligent and querulous people, dissident people. In which case it's me that will look the fool. But for the moment, whilst I remain blissfully unaware of it, I will not allow the show to be diverted down rabbit holes. The plight of Christians in Syria, as indeed was the case in Iraq after the overthrow of the regime there, as well as other minorities, the Yazidi in particular. In Syria, there's even more minorities, even more religions, ethnicities, and they are all in grave peril. And what I suggest that you do, Father Raul, is tell all these oh-so-Christian American politicians that are never done telling us how godly they are, that are never done thumping their Bibles. I'm sure it's the case in Texas as it is in other states. Tell them how terrified you are for the plight of your brethren in Syria, and asking why the American government went to such lengths, billions of dollars and efforts, training, weapons, propaganda, diplomatic support, economic sanctions, Caesar sanctions, all of that. Ask them why they care so little about God's people in Syria when they're oh so holy, especially when they're running for election at home. Now look, it's been another big week on the podcast front. We're in the top 20 in Malta, Guatemala, Albania, Oman, and Bulgaria, and the top 50 in Germany and Sweden. You can download the MOATS podcast right now by scanning the QR code on your screen. Meanwhile, I want to talk to Colin in South London about Syria. Colin, what's on your mind?
Hi there, George. I hope you can hear me okay on the Western line, so to speak.
Yeah, all good.
Good, man. I just wanted to say, first of all, you do a fantastic job. We might not agree on everything, but I definitely agree on 95% of things you say. So, great job.
That'll do, me. That'll do.
I just wanted to basically, very quickly, I just wanted to say that if you look at Turkey in this and their role, whether we like Erdogan or not, over the last couple of years, he has always said that Israel will come after Turkey eventually. And what we see happening at the moment is Israel edging closer and closer to Turkey. And the only country that can stand up to Israel, I believe, is Turkey. You know, they are going to be the only people. The only reason why Turkey hasn't gone full out to help the Palestinians is because there's no Muslim country that are willing to stand behind Turkey and actually help them.
But Turkey is a Muslim country. But hold on.
Absolutely.
Turkey is a Muslim country. Not only that, it claims to be the strongest Muslim country. It's a member of NATO with Article 5 protection against being attacked by anybody. It has a vast army that most of the time kills its own citizens. It is supplying oil to Israel. Never mind not taking up arms against Israel. It is supplying 40% of Israel's oil. It's selling food and clothes and all kinds to Israel. No boycotts of Israel in Syria. So why are you ready, Colin, to give them such a free pass? Last word to you. Go on.
Well, I'm not giving them a free pass, but if you look at what happened in 1974, when North Cyprus, when the Turkish Cypriots were going through some sort of a genocide, okay, there was no Muslim country that stepped aside and helped Turkey against North Cyprus. Even to this day, there's only Turkey recognises North Cyprus. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, none of the Muslim countries recognise Northern Cyprus, and they went through the same thing as the Palestinians. If Turkey didn't come to help, there would be no Turkish Cypriots left. So the point I'm trying to say to you is we need to look at Saudi Arabia, we need to look at Egypt, we need to look at Jordan, we need to look at these countries who are around Palestine who have done nothing to help Palestine. And honestly, I do believe that the only country that will eventually stop Israel will be Turkey. Turkey's playing the long game. They've been sucked into this NATO thing. And hey, maybe Erdogan's been bought out. You know, maybe he has been bought out. But I still believe that it will be the Turks. They're ferocious fighters. And, their plans are to send the 4 million Syrians back to Syria, which back to their land. Turkey were the only ones who took the Syrians in. So they'll be sending them back. They'll be protecting their borders so Israel can't get any closer to Turkey's borders. That's what I believe is going to happen over the next year or so.
Well, you're entitled to your belief and to express it here, Colin. Well done for that call. 40,529 votes. Wow. And overwhelmingly people say that the Islamist rebels in Syria are backed by the CIA. So I think I need to take a break, and then coming up in the next half hour is Scott Ritter. But if you're watching on YouTube, you won't see the interview. We are again having to end the live stream when Scott comes on. So when Scott comes on, you'll need to switch to X, to Facebook, to Rumble, to Instagram, presumably to TikTok and all the other platforms that we are on. So bear that in mind, please. Cleo1KO says, if the Syrian army ran away without putting up a fight, why should Russia continue spilling its blood for Syria? And Kurt Boss says, look, can I just answer that stupid comment? First of all, why was the Syrian army left in such disarray by its allies who could, if a general in the Syrian army was on $40 a month, it wouldn't have cost Iran, China, and Russia much to make that general much better paid so that he couldn't be bought, so that he couldn't be subverted or even just demotivated sufficiently that he is in the end going to run away when terrorists seek to overrun his country. But if you think it was expensive propping up Syria, just you wait and see how expensive it will turn out to be not to have propped up Syria. Think about that. Kurt Boss says the USA already holds all of Syria's oil and wheat. And Mohammed says, how is it a death blow to Palestine? For decades, Assad and his father were allies of the Israeli occupation. Well, first of all, Mohammed, I know you're quite possibly in Ward 5 at Broadmoor, but on the off chance that you're at large, maybe been discharged or out for the weekend, why don't you pick up a phone and call the show so that I can demonstrate just what an idiot, lunatic remark that is. Let me tell you in the words of, I don't know what your view on them is, but what's that organization? Hamas, yeah. In the words of Hamas, the only people sending weapons to Gaza was Iran. Take a look at your map, Mohammed. Maybe geography ain't your strong point. How do you think those Iranian weapons got from Iran into the hands of Hamas? How do you think, Mohammed? And take a look at the map that was redrawn today. And I don't know, scratch your head or something and say, oh, there won't be any more weapons traveling that way. Idiot. Wrong spell, says Gigi. Still think 9/11 was not an inside job? Well, it might have been. I've never said that it wasn't. I've said that we need a new 9/11 inquiry into exactly what happened on 9/11. That the 9/11 official report, official story, is ludicrous. It's a comedy of errors and a comedy of omissions and deliberate distortions and denial of truth. So I don't know where you got that from. Maybe you haven't seen any of our recent coverage on 9/11, but you can always find it on YouTube. Joseph Roy says, amazing how you go from a $10 million bounty terror leader to a moderate rebel. I don't know. You'll be putting his pronouns in his profile from now on. Let me take a quick break and then go to Gayatri Live with the social media update. You don't want to miss that. Stay tuned. Donald is in Inverness on Assange. Go ahead, Donald.
Hi, George. Good to hear from you again. I'm phoning about Assange, but really your audience is highly privileged to benefit from your international research. I mean, I've learned, tonight you told us about the misfired missile and the helicopter crash. We'll never hear that on mainstream news. Last time, Gonzalo Lira told us about Poland doubling its armed forces. These are very important pieces of information. Now, information is one thing, but what I want to do, George, is I want to raise the topic of conscience. But I want to illustrate it with an incident that I saw in a documentary in World War II. A U.S. soldier called Glenn Fraser had a Japanese officer's sword at his head, ready to chop it off to make him an example to others. And he was told that he would die for having his hands in his pockets in the cold weather. And did he have any last words to say? So this Fraser looked the fellow, this is the Japanese officer, looked him in the eye. And he told the Japanese officer that he could kill him. But he says, you cannot kill my spirit. He says, and my spirit will lodge in your body and haunt you until the day you die.
Very powerful, Donald. I too, like you, believe in the judgment day. I believe in the afterlife. I believe that we will reap what we sow. And I agree entirely with the point you make about conscience. I put it this way, that my conscience is my daily communion with God. And if I follow my conscience, I won't do wrong. And if we all reawaken our conscience, as you beautifully put it, then we will have no need for policing. We'll certainly have less need for policing. And heaven knows we could do with that. You know that they speak the best English in the world, in Inverness, and Donald is a good example of it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So coming up later in the hour, I'll be having what I think may turn out to be an epic. I hope it will be an educative and even inspiring conversation with Scott Ritter. But you'll not be able to watch it on YouTube, so you need to retune when Scott comes on to one of the other platforms, because YouTube will take down any interview that I do with Scott Ritter in the name of freedom of speech, in the name of liberty or liberalism or something like that. However, I am joined by my good wife Gayatri with the social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So we woke up this morning to a nightmare when the support for Palestinian resistance was at its highest worldwide in all of its 100 years. Old, young, black, white, poor, rich, Christian, Muslims, all Muslims, we were united as one. And then they threw in the Syria card. They threw in the Syria card, and just like that, the Palestinian cause support group was dismantled like that. The old divide and rule game was fitted nicely and timely just to cause what happened today, the nightmare that developed today in Damascus. And now looking at the situation and seeing us back where we were 10 years ago, I look back at the emails from 10 years ago about Syria. Here's one from Dave. He wrote this, actually not 10 years ago, only 4 years ago. He said, Russia and Syria should have attacked ISIS and Islamists months ago, instead of allowing the USA and Turkey, in coordination with their ISIS and Islamist allies, to regroup and come up with another connivance. That was only 4 years ago. And this tweet, this was from a good 10 years ago, is as follows. Remember all those freedom fighters in Syria want to fly planes into our building? And this was a tweet from the one and only Donald Trump, soon to be President Donald Trump.
I saw that, yeah. Yeah, Donald Trump wrote that in 2013. These freedom fighters in Syria, they're the ones that want to fly their airplanes into our tall buildings. I really hope that Donald Trump has not forgotten that. Joe Biden definitely wouldn't have written that tweet, because the Democrats have supported these Islamists right from the very beginning. Indeed, this has a long and inglorious history. The British invented it, as in so much else. We helped found and nurtured the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in the early 1950s, so that we could use them against the Arab nationalist leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, President Nasser. We invented the Muslim Brotherhood. It was invented in London. And it was its first outing, though not its last, was to undermine the pan-Arabic message of the Nasserists. And, well, we've fallen out with the Muslim Brotherhood from time to time, but occasionally they can still be useful to each other, if you get my drift. Sorry, Gayatri, go ahead.
Here's another one from Candace Owens, again on point. She says, they are erasing Christian history all across the Middle East, and Christians in the West are completely oblivious to what they have been supporting. Take note, Christians in the West, of your heritage, the ancient heritage. And then Daniel Ward writes in reply to our poll, whether the CIA is backing these rebels. Terrible to see what's happening over there. And for the classless Angela Rayner to welcome this bloody coup and the head-chopping savages behind it shows the ignorance of a woman profoundly unfit for public office. Have you seen the Prime Minister's statement? Did you see what Keir Starmer posted welcoming the new...
I did, yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. He's welcoming ISIS and al-Qaeda into power in Damascus. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we here on the Mother of All Talk Shows will be watching everything that goes wrong. And we will remind people of Angela Rayner and of Keir Starmer and of Tony Blair and of all these Labour politicians who have helped Al-Qaeda and ISIS sharpen their knives and take power on the Mediterranean. What could possibly go wrong? Last one from you, Gayatri.
Just to make a point from Gary Masters, he says, oh, but it's so much nicer to call them our moderate rebels. It sounds so much nicer to these delicate Western senses than what they really are. Radical, head-chopping throat cutter, heart-eating, deranged religious lunatics that hate everyone that's not in their sad and sorry club of evil. You know what I was also looking back at our interview with Mother Agnes. You referred to her diocese in Maaloula in Syria, and it was heartening to see her then, 10 years ago. And I'm just praying for her and all the minorities in Syria, their well-being, now that they are under the leadership of a diverse new outfit.
Yeah, they're literally under the boot of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I wonder how a nun will be able to survive that. I wonder how a priest, I wonder how a Christian parishioner will be able to survive that. You and I were listening earlier today to what happened in 2013 when ISIS and Al-Qaeda burned down to the base, only the basement left, of the ancient 1,500-year-old Christian Church of the Miracle in Syria, which is on the place that Jesus supposedly made the gift of the loaves and the fishes. Anyone who knows the Bible will know that Jesus performed a miracle there. He fed the multitude with a tiny handful of loaves and fishes. And that church was built on the place where the miracle took place. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda destroyed it. So if they can destroy the priceless religious relics and artifacts, what hope do today's Christians in Syria now have? But that brings me to a point, if I may. Presumably, all these Syrians that are out celebrating on the streets of European cities will now be headed back. After all, they're no longer refugees, right?
Exactly.
They were refugees from Assad. So now that Assad is gone and they're out celebrating, they're presumably all going back, right? I mean, surely they're not going to continue to live in the Netherlands, Belgium, England, America. They're going to go back to Syria under new management, right? But what about the refugees that will now start flowing in the opposite direction? If HTS, Al-Qaeda, ISIS has not changed its spots, if it does seek to do what it did over the last 10 years or more, well, we're going to have a queue of Syrian refugees going back home and a new queue of Syrian refugees headed in the opposite direction. As I keep saying, if you want to stop the boats, you've got to stop the wars. But the Western politicians that complain endlessly about the boats are the same Western politicians launching war after war after war in the countries from which these refugees come. Anyway, we'll talk about it later over a bag of chips. Thank you very much, Gayatri, for that. Let me squeeze in a call from Simon in London on Syria. Simon, welcome.
Hi, George. How you doing? Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Well, to be honest with you, George, I don't care about the censors. I know you've been hounded by censors on Google and on YouTube. But to be honest with you, I genuinely believe that 9/11 was now done with Western involvement in it. That includes Britain, America, Israel, possibly even Saudi Arabia. I mean, most of the 9/11 bombers were Saudis, and they were never questioned. So that's the first thing I wanted to get off my chest. Secondly, we have a horrible situation you just quite rightly mentioned, where we've got lots of immigrant boats, some of them illegal immigrants, some of them trying to claim asylum and so on and so forth, some of them valid, some of them not valid, and our politicians are complaining every single day that there's too many foreigners, there's too many immigrants coming into the country, Well, a lot of these politicians are the same ones who have supported these ISIS, al-Qaeda rebels, these moderate rebels. I wonder if these rebels believe that a woman in a hospital is a birthing person who chest feeds, I don't know how moderate they are. But no doubt, as you quite rightly mentioned, this is now going to create a situation whereby there's going to be even more immigrants and asylum seekers coming in. And no doubt, the brutal asylum system that we have will just close the door on these poor people, They'll let these head-chopping, racist, crazy, insane individuals from these fundamentalist organizations kill them. And it's really sad when you look at it, George.
Well, I was 1 mile away from the Manchester Arena when the bomb exploded, killing and maiming scores of children at the Ariana Grande concert. The bomb was carried by and exploded by one of the Libyan Islamist fundamentalist fanatic extremists that our own government had encouraged to congregate in the great city of Manchester. And then, when it came time to use them to overthrow the Gaddafi regime in Libya, we sent them, literally packed them off to Libya to become jihadist fighters. And whilst there, some of them became so radicalized and extremized that they decided to bite the hand that had fed them for so long, namely the good people of England. And the son of one of the most prominent of these fanatics returned to Manchester with others from Libya and blew up all these children. And I'll never forget the sound of that bomb. I'll never forget the metaphorical screams of those children. They were real, of course, but I just was not there and could not hear them. But I can, as a father, imagine them very easily indeed. Now that we know that there are thousands of supporters of al-Qaeda in Syria, thousands, they were all there on the streets celebrating. Now that we know there are thousands of supporters of the victory of al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria, it's no longer tolerable, from my point of view, that they should continue to live in Britain, that they should continue to live in any European city. They should go back now to ISIS and al-Qaeda governed Syria. I mean, I can't imagine why they would not want to. Can you? All right, thanks, Simon in London. So if you're watching on YouTube, we're about to end the live stream on YouTube because we're not able to conduct an interview with Scott Ritter on YouTube. So you must change platforms now to continue watching the mother of all talk shows. You can look for us on Rumble, Facebook, and on Twitter. The show continues. So on YouTube, from us, it's good night.